Lonely rancher bought a deaf girl sold by her drunk father. Then realized she heard. Texas 1881. The late-season sun baked the dust into the wooden bones of the market town. Horses neighed, cattle bawled, and men barked over prices with whiskey breath and worn boots. The last livestock auction of autumn was winding down, but a crowd still lingered near a corral gate, where a bay mare stood trembling, ribs sharp under her hide, flanks striped with dried blood. Silas Carrion adjusted his hat against the glare, silent as ever. 35, a man shaped by land and silence. He rarely came to town unless it was for supplies or horses. He had spotted the mayor earlier that morning and circled back now as bidding thinned. His boot heels thudded it against packed clay as he approached. That was when he noticed her. A girl no more than 19 stood just behind the corral, hair matted to her face, dress torn at the hem. Her bare feet were chalked with dust. She did not speak, did not cry. Her eyes wandered, unfocused, as if following something no one else could see. Standing beside her was a man with a bottle in one hand and a rope in the other. The rope tied not to an animal, but to her wrist. "Had a dumb one here," the drunk hollered to no one in particular. "Came out of my first wife, I think. She don't talk, don't hear, neither. But she cleans, cooks, don't sass. Cheap." A few men chuckled darkly. One spat on the ground. Silas turned away. He did not want this. He had come for a horse. But then he felt it. Not a voice, not a cry, just a glance. The girl was watching him. No desperation in her face, no pleading in her body. Just a look, clear, still fixed on his face. And in that look was something he had not seen in a long time, understanding, or maybe a mirror of his own alaniness. The drunk stumbled closer. You got coin. Want the horse? She comes with it. I ain't dragging her back. Not worth the dust on her toes." Silas hesitated. The mayor pawed at the ground, blowing froth through her nostrils. The girl's gaze did not move. He turned back, looked the drunk in the eye. "I'll take both." The laughter from the nearby men was instant and crude. "You buying livestock or starting a harem, Silas?" one called out. Silas did not answer. He counted coins into the man's hand. Enough for a horse, not enough for a soul. The man yanked the rope toward him, but the girl flinched, stepping behind Silas instinctively. "She yours now," the drunk slurred. "Don't say I didn't warn you. Ain't worth feeding." Silas untied the rope, tossed it back. He guided the mayor out of the pen. The girl walking behind with soft, deliberate steps. She held nothing but the thin shawl draped over her shoulders. When they reached his wagon, she stopped, waited, still silent. He opened the back and motioned for her to climb in. She did, folding herself into the corner like someone used to being invisible. As he climbed up to the driver's bench, he felt the faintest tug on his coat. He looked down. Her fingers, small, calloused, had brushed his sleeve just once. She did not look at him now. Her gaze rested on the distant hills. But in that single touch, he felt it. She had not thanked him, had not begged, but she had chosen in that moment to trust him. Silas Carrion, who spoke more with horses than men, who lived alone on 200 acres of red Texas clay with fences for company and scars he never named. And now a girl who could not hear, a girl who might understand more than anyone had ever guessed. He snapped the reins. The wagon creaked forward, wheels crunching over the hard pan road out of town. Behind him, the girl sat curled beneath a blanket, face turned to the wind. She never looked back. Neither did he. The wagon rolled through dusk and dust, winding between low hills and scattered mosquite until the fields widened and the sky opened into Texas emptiness. Silas's ranch wasn't much to look at, just a main house with a slanted roof, a few outholdings, and a long stretch of prairie where cattle grazed under open sky. But it was quiet, clean, and for a man like him, it had always been enough until now. He helped the girl down from the wagon, unsure if she would bolt or freeze, but she stepped lightly to the ground. Her eyes swept the land, not frightened, just watchful, as if cataloging everything without asking permission. Inside the kitchen, Silas stoked the fire and pointed to the kettle. She nodded and moved toward it without hesitation, finding the tin cups and ladle like someone who'd always belonged near fire and hunger. Still, she hadn't made a sound. After supper, he handed her a piece of chalk from the cabinet and tapped the wooden doorframe beside the table. "Name," he said slowly. She looked at him for a long moment, then crouched beside the frame. With careful fingers, she scrolled a single name in soft slanted letters. "M. Lane," he read it once, then twice. "M. Lane," he repeated out loud, like testing how it tasted on the air. She gave no smile, but she turned and walked away into the darkened barn. The next morning, Silas found her in the stable, crouched beside the same beaten-down mare. The horse had barely eaten since the auction, its back leg swollen from old strain. Emmeline ran a damp cloth down the mare's flank, whispering with her hands, not words, not signs, just the careful rhythm of someone who listened with her palms and her breath. Silas stood at the barn door, arms crossed. He had seen seasoned ranch hands get kicked for less, but the mare stayed still, shuddering only slightly, and let the girl wrap its leg with quiet patience. Maybe she couldn't hear, but she sure as hell understood. That day, Silas gave her chores, simple things. Wash the floorboards, boil water, clean the tack room. She did them without complaint, without asking, without one sound. Each night he left chalk for her and she would write notes in the margins of their world. Bacon low, dog limping, wind smells like dust. They never spoke, but the quiet didn't feel empty until the storm came. It started like most Texas storms, slow and deceitful. A hot breeze rose around sundown, brushing against the long grass like warning breath. Silas glanced at the sky, noticed a line of clouds brewing far off, but thought nothing of it. He was in the cattle shed when she appeared. Emmeline, barefoot, wild-made, breath-quick but soundless. She grabbed his sleeve and tugged hard. "What?" he asked, startled. She pointed upward, her hands trembling, her eyes said what her mouth could not. "Down." He hesitated halfway through checking a sick calf, but something in her gaze snapped him into motion. She pulled again toward the barn door away from the corral. Then it happened. A crack. No, a shatter. The world split in two as a bolt of lightning dropped from the heavens, striking the tree that loomed just behind the cattle shed. The blast shook the earth beneath them. Sparks flew. The tree burst into flame and collapsed with a moan that sounded like the sky weeping. Silas stumbled back. The calves bleated in terror. Smoke curled into the sky. He looked at her. Emmeline stood frozen just outside the doorway, her face lit by the flickering fire, eyes steady, chest rising fast. She had known, not guessed, not sensed after the wind rose. She had known before thunder, before the air changed. Silas walked toward her slow, still half in shock. "How did you?" But she only looked at him. Silent, certain. That night, after the fire was doused and the animals calmed, he sat beside her at the kitchen table. No chalk this time, no words, just a man with his hands on the wood and a girl who could not speak. And yet somehow she had heard something no one else could. Not thunder, not wind, but the warning inside the world. Silas realized for the first time in years he wasn't alone. He looked at her hands folded in her lap. "Emaine," he said again. She lifted her eyes to meet his silence answered. And it was enough. Since the storm, Silas had started to pay more attention, not with suspicion, but with the quiet curiosity of a man who had lived too long in silence, and now found himself staring at something he could not explain, and maybe did not want to. Emmeline never spoke. She never signed, never wrote much more than her name. She had no books, no formal learning, no words. And yet, there were days when it seemed like she understood more than anyone he had ever known. One morning when the head cow stood alone in the pasture not eating, Silas chalked it up to the cold. He made a note to watch her. But Emmeline, she moved without hesitation. She brought straw to the birthing stall, drew water with mint leaves from the well, and stood beside the cow, stroking her belly in slow, measured circles. By sunset, the cow was in labor. She had known. Somehow she had known. Silas said nothing, but he watched her. That night he could not sleep. The next day he tried again. He came back from town with tension in his shoulders, the weight of old history heavy on his back. The sheriff had spoken in half-truths and warnings about claims on the land. Whispers that his father had taken more than was rightfully his during the war. Bloodshed, relocation, guilt, none of it was new, but it never stopped stinging. He did not speak a word of it to Emmeline, but when he sat on the front step, staring out into the falling dusk, she came and stood beside him. She did not speak. She simply placed her hand on his shoulder, light as a breeze, steady as breath. After a long moment, Silas muttered, "How did you know that I feel shame over this land? Shame about what my father did to keep it?" Emmeline's dark eyes searched his. Then slowly she lifted her hand and placed it on his chest right over his heart. After that she turned and walked toward the old oak tree where his father's grave rested silent under the Texas sky. She had never read the stone, never asked questions, and yet she knew. At night Silas tossed in bed, sweating through a dream of cannon fire in scorched hills. His father's voice came through the smoke, rough, proud, trembling. "I gave you the land, Silas, and I gave you the blood on it." Silas woke with a start, his breath loud in the stillness, and then he saw her. Emmeline sat in a chair by the hearth. She had lit a single candle. In the flickering light, her profile looked carved from shadow and grace. On the table beside the candle was a blue handkerchief, faded, trimmed with hand-stitched lace. His mother's. Silas had not seen it in 10 years. It had been locked away in a cedar chest. No one else touched. He sat up. "How?" Emmeline didn't look at him. She rose without a sound and walked to the door. She didn't need to explain. He had heard something no one else could. Not words, not memories, but pain, grief, the silent weight of guilt pressed between ribs. The aching sound of a man's heart breaking when he was too proud to let it be heard. And in her quiet, she answered. She heard. And for the first time in Silas's life, he feared not for his land, nor his legacy, nor even his soul. He feared losing the one person who knew what he felt before he ever said a word. The first whisper came from the blacksmith's wife. "She stares too long at the cattle," she said, folding breadcloths under the porch, voice low but sharp as wire, like she knows which one will fall next. By the end of the week, it was the preacher's son who added more wood to the fire. "She touched our goat," he told a circle of curious ears. "And 2 days later, it gave birth too early. That ain't natural." No one had ever heard Emaine speak. And the fewer words she gave, the more the town seemed eager to fill the silence for her with fear. At the general store, a woman pulled her child behind her when Emmeline walked by, even though she only came to fetch flour. At the post, someone spat near her feet. Most days, she kept her head down. She never flinched. But Silas saw the way her fingers curled tighter around the basket in her arms, and how her footsteps became quieter, as if trying to disappear from ground that refused to forget. He did not speak of it to her, and she never asked why the world could not stand to see quiet kindness. But one afternoon, when a Ranchen's boy came down with a burning fever, red-faced and seizing in his sleep, it was not the doctor who came. It was Emily. She moved softly into the barn where the child lay. She did not ask permission. She merely knelt beside the cot, placed a hand on the boy's chest, then his forehead, and closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she walked outside, cut 3 types of herbs from Silas's drying wall, lavender, feverfew, and rabbit tobacco, and returned with a hot cloth. The boy drank the steeped leaves in silence. By sunrise, he was sitting up, hungry again. His mother wept, held Emmeline's hand with trembling thanks. But the next day, she could be heard whispering at the well. She did not ask what the boy's symptoms were. How did she know? How did she know? The fear was no longer quiet. 3 days later, they came with torches, not lit, but carried like promises. 8 men and women, boots kicking up dust, stood at the gate of Silas's ranch. The oldest among them, Mr. Withers, a man whose own daughter had not spoken to him in years, stepped forward. "We want her gone," he said. "That girl hears things she ought not." Silas stood in the barn's doorway, arms folded across his chest. He had not shaved in days, and his face was hard as the timber framing behind him. "She's mute," he said. "That ain't the same as deaf," Withers snapped. "She sees what's coming before the sky even shifts. She talks to animals like they talk back. A steer of mine dropped dead last week and she was the only one who touched it." "You think she cursed it?" "I think she's cursed, period." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Inside the house, Emmeline stood behind the curtain. She had heard the gravel shift under their boots. She had seen their faces twisted, not with hate, but something worse. Certainty. She moved to open the door, but Silas held up a hand. He stepped forward, boots sinking slightly in the thawing mud, and faced them squarely. "She saved a child's life. Maybe she's the one who gave him the fever in the first place," a woman spat. Silas didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "She is the only person I know who listens," he said. "Not with ears, with her hands, with her breath, with her whole damn soul." The crowd stilled. "I have lived 35 years, he continued, voice low but unshaking. And I can count on one hand the number of people who truly heard me. Not just my words, but my silences, my regrets, my grief. And she did without saying a single thing." He turned slightly, his eyes sweeping over them. "You want to run someone off for being different, for seeing the world you're too afraid to face? Fine, but you'll have to go through me." Withers opened his mouth, then closed it. No one moved. Then slowly the crowd dispersed, torches unused, boots heavy. That night, the ranch was silent except for the wind. Inside, Emmeline placed a pot of warm cider on the fire, then moved beside Silas at the table. She did not sign, did not write, did not even look at him. But after a moment, she reached out, rested her fingers on his hand. It was not thanks, it was recognition. He turned his palm upward, curled his fingers gently around hers, and together in the stillness they listened to the crackle of the wood, the hush of the night, and the bond growing between two souls that never needed words to speak. The first snowfall of December came quiet and slow, like someone laying down a blanket over all that had burned or broken. Emmeline stood by the window of the log kitchen, her fingers threading a needle through scraps of old fabric, leather patches, wool cuffs, the lining from an old coat Silas no longer wore. She was making a cloak, not for herself, but for him. She did not need to hear the wind to know the cold was coming. Silas watched her from the barn door. She moved with purpose, every motion deliberate. She had no words. But in the weeks since the townsfolk had turned away, and he had chosen to keep her there, his world had found rhythm again. She brewed coffee every morning before the sky turned gray. She lined the chicken coop with pine needles. She brushed the horses in slow circles and trained the yearlings using gestures no cowboy had ever thought to try. He had never seen animals respond that way to someone. She would stand still just long enough for a skittish foal to inch closer. Then she'd raise a single hand slow and open and wait. And somehow always they listened. The silence around the ranch no longer felt like loneliness. It felt like listening. One late afternoon, Silas rode out toward the ridge, checking the fences before the storm they both knew was coming. The light had just begun to dim when his horse startled. A loose rock maybe or a scent on the wind and reared. He was thrown hard, landing shoulder first on frozen earth. The breath rushed from his chest. For a moment he could not feel anything but the throbbing pulse of pain where his arm struck a jutting root. He staggered to his feet, bleeding from the elbow. The sky was deepening fast. He wrapped a cloth around the wound and tried to walk, but each step sent sharp pain through his ribs. When he stumbled into the yard, the last light had faded. Emmeline burst from the cabin before he could knock. She had felt it. Or perhaps she had just known one of those strange, uncanny instincts of hers that no one could explain. She helped him inside, sat him down by the hearth, and peeled the cloth from his wound with gentle fingers. Her brow furrowed as she worked. She brought water, cleaned the gash, and pressed a puss of ureo and pine sap against it. He watched her. "You always know," he whispered. She met his eyes. Then, without warning, she lifted his hand to her face, then pressed her lips soft, warm, against the edge of the wound. Silas stilled. The fire cracked, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Emmeline did not speak. She did not smile, but something passed between them, like a door opening in the quiet. Later, as the storm rolled in and snow dusted the window panes, Silas sat across from her at the table. He had taken a piece of paper from his desk drawer and written slowly, carefully, each letter shaped with meaning that could not be spoken aloud. He turned it to face her. "I want to hear your heart," it read, "if you'll let me listen with mine." She looked at the words for a long time. Then her fingers reached out and touched them one by one as if to feel the truth inside the ink. When she finally raised her eyes, they were wet, but not from sorrow. She reached across the table and touched his chest. Just once, just enough. And then, for the first time since she had entered his life, she smiled. Not a polite smile, not one of fear or thanks, but a smile like sunrise, like something breaking free after being held in too long. Outside the wind howled, but inside that cabin a silence deeper than words had found its voice, and it was warm, and it was real. The days softened. Winter still gripped the ridges, but between storms life returned slowly. So did something else? Something quiet and steady between Silas and Emmeline. She taught him sign language. Water, fire, thank you. Her fingers moved like branches in the wind. And though he fumbled, she never laughed, only touched his hands, guiding them until he got it. He taught her to ride. She had never sat a saddle before. The first time she clung to the horn, knuckles white, but he walked beside her, speaking low though she could not hear. She moved with the horse anyway, sensing its rhythm through her bones. They built a small room off the cabin, part shelter, part refuge. There they shared meals in silence by the fire. They did not need words. Their glances said more than language could. He noticed things. She smiled when birds,